Kate, when you and Sarah and Nadja presented your notions of the ground of ministry is creating communities of flourishing that lead to opportunities to explore faith and live out the love commandment, one of the elements that you thought were going to be critical to nurturing into existence a community of flourishing was regular opportunities for real conversations. What did you mean, and why is it critical?
So I think one of the common misconceptions about adolescents is that they don't want to talk about stuff, that you offer them an opportunity and they're going to say, I don't know, or whatever the other things are that they're going to deflect the opportunity to say something about themselves. I have found the opposite in almost all experiences that I've had with adolescents, in particular in a youth group. I think if you can offer adolescents a safe place where they feel contained but welcomed to share the things that they are suffering with, their joys and their sorrows, the most powerful thing is that they learn from listening to the other stories that they are not alone. And one of the greatest sufferings of adolescents is they think they're alone. They feel alone. They are convinced that they are alone. And so to hear another adolescent, someone who they might think has it all, say that they share a similar pain is a validation that can only come in that type of a sharing environment. So we are talking about ways to do that in healthy, appropriate, safe spaces that gives them the opportunity to share and to discover this sense of companionship in all that they're experiencing. But we have to think about some of the ways that we do that to keep them safe. What are some of the ways that you did that?
Sure. We found that there was so much power in this circle. Often our small group teams that had walked a year together would meet regularly, consistently, have some fidelity in the partnership and the conversations around the circle. But when they became very comfortable, when they really trusted and loved, things would percolate from teenage life. Sometimes things that were too big and too hard for the group to hold. And so we had to get wise about how we were helping our kids disclose or not disclose, to have some discretion over what they were sharing and in what places. So we really wanted our kids to know that the youth workers that walked with them, that loved them, their youth ministers and advisors, those were conversation partners always about all things, and that we would be there with them to receive that, to hold that, to quickly get them into the right conversation partners, involve other people into those conversations. So with confidence, hold it, but also with confidence, know that that information would be ultimately sent and get to the right place. Mm-hmm. But then we had to also protect that group because some of those topics were too heavy for our kids to share with one another, mm-hmm. too real. So the sharings of teenage life are appropriate, but the deep woundedness of suicidal thoughts or attempts was too much for that circle. Mm-hmm. And so we had to be very explicit about what those boundaries were, how our kids could share and maybe where they would share in other places with just maybe an adult they trusted. That was hard to figure out because we did not want to silence our kids. We didn't want to say, this is the only place where you feel like you can share and now you cannot. But how are you being wise? How are we helping you disclose? What discretion are we modeling for you to then bring it to the right person? Mm-hmm. We just had to say it plain and really mark it for what it was. We have held up Vespers, small group conversations, as places where they will laugh and be joyful and be silly together, but also cry and share and listen to one another. And that those were not group therapy circles. They were not places for our kids to just dump their life. Years ago we would get murmurings of like, oh, I can't wait to share this, or tomorrow night's going to be really good. I really think, I'm going to. And so we would try to find those kids and pull them aside and say, well, let's talk about what your aim is here. If you want to share this with your peers, why? And so helping them march back some of those inclinations just to dump into a circle where it wouldn't really be received, instead be in a conversation with an adult who could hold that. We gave those conversations more structure so that our kids were bringing their own experiences to a common question or a common theme for the day, So they had some common language, and they could get to that I'm not alone experience without overexposing themselves, becoming more vulnerable, and bringing something to the group that really wasn't meant for peers.
And I think
Can I pick up on this, Kate? Because there's something I want you to answer. You were a member of a youth group for many years. You were a youth minister for many years, and then you went off to the Brown School of Social Work at Washington University. You trained for, and now you've been a psychotherapist for many years in a school setting. And I found that, related to what Caroline was saying, one of the most difficult questions. Yes, setting the boundaries right. You can always bring us your concerns. We will always walk with them, and we will always help you get the help you need. And many of these are appropriate for the group to share and find they're not alone, and some of them are not. Okay, let's call that the boundary question. The second question was this kind of egocentric tendency that if you get 14 young people in a group and they get to that space of willing to be vulnerable, what you get is what I called serial dumping. Person A. I'm so glad we're finally here. I love you fellas so much. I'm so feel like this is such a comfortable place, and I finally feel that I can say I'm really worried about my dad and my mom getting divorced, and I don't know what to do about it. A tearful exposure, and then there's a silence. The candle is passed to person B, and person B says, "Oh, I've been waiting all year for this. It's so wonderful, you guys. I love you so much. We've walked together. I can trust you with something that's really terrible. And my mom died 4 years ago, and I've never been able to talk to anybody about how sad I am." And then the candle passes, and there isn't any response.
Right.
And it might not even be the young people's inclinations to respond. And simply dialogical response from the leader is a little not groupy about the shared experience. So you both want the boundaries, then you want to create space where they can share and find they're not alone. But how do you deflect this serial dumping tendency?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I think that goes back to what Caroline was saying about you're setting the groundwork before you start these conversations. Part of the things that they need to learn is what are the boundaries and how to stick to them, and then what are the norms of this group sharing experience. So modeling and teaching empathy and appropriate responses, having some kind of a discussion within the group of, if you were to share something that was very painful for you, what do you need from your group? What do you need to hear? What kinds of words? How do you feel comforted? Do you need a hug? Do you need silence? Do you need us to move on? Do you need us to respond to you? And to understand what each member of that small group needs to feel supported in their sharing within what is possible of a group that is not a therapy group and it is not being run by a trained therapist, but within the limitations of what this group can do, and set that from the very beginning, before any disclosure happens, before anyone gets set off to experience that I just shared something very intimate and upsetting and no one talked about it. So creating the ethos that this is what, when we share in this group, this is what we do, this is what we need, and this is how we support each other after these conversations.
Let me push it that one more way as kind of a last question. You made such an important point. A youth group or a small relational group in a youth group is not a group therapy group. It has distinctive resources in prayer, covenants of love, command, and agape for one another, opportunities to refer to Scripture and the traditions of the faith, but it's still not a group therapy setting. So could you just summarize for us, kind of in closing, what's the distinction between a group therapy group and a small relational group of adolescents in conversation? What's appropriate perhaps in group therapy, but not in an area where you don't have a trained therapist, you don't have the permission of the parents, it's not what you offer to do group therapy. And what resources do you then, on the other hand, bring in the youth group setting that don't fit as well in the group therapy setting? Could you just help us understand the distinction so youth ministers who are listening go, that's what I do and that's what I don't do?
Right. Well, and again, I think it's starting with intention and purpose. So setting up with the leaders what their role is and what their role isn't. in terms of when you have these small group discussions or whatever format this comes in a youth group, having those very clear and direct conversations with the leaders and the youth about what it is and it isn't. Having the kids understand that the youth group leaders are probably not trained therapists. So these are not necessarily groups where you are going to learn all the ways to feel better. These are not the groups that are going to diagnose or address specific elements of what you're bringing to the group. But the purpose might be more like validation, and they know that that's what they are getting and looking for from this group. If they understand that we all feel alone, we all feel like we suffer without other people understanding what that's like. So the purpose of this group is for us to prove to you that you're not alone, so that you can hear from your peers that they have similar experiences and they have similar pains and worries and fears, and it's not to give you therapy, and then setting up, but if you need that, we understand that some of us are going to need that. Here's what we're going to do for you. Here are the resources that we're going to have surrounding this group, so that if you notice during this time of sharing that you need more, or if you notice that your friend needs more, you know what to do. You feel empowered, that you are not then stuck with this information. It has come out now, and what do you do with it? But okay, I know what to do with this. I'm going to go talk to my youth leader, and I'm going to say, this is what I need, or this is what my friend needs. Can you help me do that? And so those direct lines of communication are open as well.